Hey guys, tonight we are not just traveling through history, we are stepping into a specific, breathless moment. Close your eyes, let the soft hum of the night, or the sound of that fan you just turned on, become the sound of a Florentine afternoon in the 1480s. You are walking, or perhaps gliding, along the Via di Servi, the cobblestones a little uneven beneath the leather soles of your boots. The air is thick, not quite with pollution, but with a vibrant, confusing mix. The sharp scent of wet marble dust from a sculptor's yard, the sweet decay of discarded fruit, and the metallic tang of newly stretched linen canvas. Look up. The light here is different. It's the golden, clarifying light that inspired a revolution, the one that makes every shadow deep and every exposed brick wall look like a masterpiece of texture. You probably won't survive this city without a healthy dose of paranoia, because behind every beautiful facade, there's a dagger, a debt, or a deceit waiting. This is the Renaissance. Beautiful, brutal, and utterly unforgiving. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always wild to see how far we travel together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand there, a little overwhelmed, adjusting the folds of your simple, though neatly maintained tunic. You're not of the elite. Your presence in this prestigious quarter is purely a matter of necessity, a small errand, perhaps, delivering a message or a modest bolt of fine, deep-dyed cloth. Florence itself feels like a living, breathing sculpture, a monument to the power of wool and banking. You know, the mainstream historical fact here is that during this period, Florence's economy was fundamentally driven by the production and trade of high-quality wool, and, crucially, by the vast banking network established by families like the Medici. Every magnificent dome and marble statue you see is bought and paid for by the sheer industrial grit of textile workers and clever financiers. They didn't just bankroll art, they bankrolled an entire age. You are acutely aware of the eyes watching. The merchant class here views anyone who looks like they might be useful as a potential investment or a future pawn. You pass the imposing, rusticated stone of the Palazzo Medici, a fortress disguised as a home. It's a statement of power, designed to look less like a pleasure palace and more like something that could withstand a siege. You turn down a narrower, shadowed alley, away from the main thoroughfare. The sounds of the city immediately soften, replaced by the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of a mallet, the scratching sound of charcoal on a rough surface, and the faint, sweet smell of drying linseed oil. You've arrived at the cluster of bottega, the workshops. Your destination today is the workshop of Messer Cosimo, a master painter struggling to keep pace in a city obsessed with the new art. Cosimo is not a genius like the young Leonardo, not yet. He's a craftsman, a worker in a guild, bound by contracts and the demands of fussy patrons. You push open the heavy wooden door. It squeaks on iron hinges, a sound that always makes you slightly jump, and you step from the bright, unforgiving Florentine sun into the glorious, messy twilight of the artist's studio. Dust motes dance in the slivers of light cutting through high windows. The air is warmer here, saturated with the earthy, mineral-rich smell of pigments. Hanging from the rafters are bundles of hog's hair for brushes, drying animal bladders used for storing paint, and sketches. Hundreds of sketches pinned up like flayed ideas.
You have to step around a stone mortar the size of a small basin, its sides stained a vibrant, impossible blue. This blue, is ultramarine, and it's ruinously expensive, ground from lapis lazuli stone imported from Afghanistan. Only the wealthiest commissions, usually for the Virgin's robe, could afford it. It's not just a color, it's a receipt. And there he is. Not Cosimo, the master, but him, the apprentice. His name is Sandro, but you will only ever think of him as mio pittore, my painter. He is perhaps 5 or 6 years older than you, utterly absorbed, perched on a stool before an enormous wooden panel, scrubbing at it with a piece of sandpaper-like shirkskin. He's scruffy, wearing a stained leather apron over his doublet, his forearms dusted with fine white plaster and red chalk. His hair is sweat damp and falls across his brow, obscuring the intense focus in his eyes. You stand by the door, quiet, waiting. Apprentices are the engine room of the Renaissance. They are the unpaid, tireless workers who grind the pigments, prepare the gesso panels, sweep the floors, and run the errands. They are often lodged and fed by the master, living a life of physical labor and intense, practical study. He pauses, scratching his cheek with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of sienna across his jaw. He doesn't look up, but he somehow knows you're there. Benvenuta, he murmurs, his voice low, slightly rough, and always managing to feel like a secret shared, even in this loud room. He says the master is at the goldsmith's, hargling over the gold leaf for the frame. He thinks they can't tell when he's been drinking their wine before noon. A small private smile plays on his lips.
You walk towards him, the sound of your steps muffled by the sawdust and scattered rags on the floor. You don't speak, but you watch him work. He is currently working on the architectural background for a small altarpiece, a study in linear perspective. Historians still argue whether Filippo Brunelleschi or another contemporary, Leon Battista Alberti, deserves the ultimate credit for formally codifying the rules of linear perspective, but every artist in Florence is now obsessed with it. Sanda's challenge is making the painted tiles recede perfectly toward a single, vanishing point, giving the illusion of depth on a flat wooden panel. He sighs, dropping the shark skin. It's like trying to trap light with geometry, he mutters. He finally looks at you, and that's when the world shifts. His eyes are a startling dark brown, and they hold an intensity that feels utterly incompatible with his messy profession. They see you, not the errand runner, not the anonymous girl from the neighborhood, but the hidden contours of your spirit. You are here, in part, because of the master, Cosimo, a fat, jovial man who pays you a small sum, a coin or two, to sit very, very still in the afternoons when the workshop is quiet. He says your face, your hands, and the particular angle of your neck are perfectly suited for a certain type of virgin, pious, humble, yet with a hint of hidden strength. You are his modella, his body double for the divine. But that relationship is purely business. The one you have with Sandro, that's the true collision. He reaches out, not touching you, but picking up a piece of charcoal and holding it before your face. He traces an invisible line down the curve of your cheekbone, the bone structure of a saint and the eyes of a pagan goddess, he whispers, a touch of gentle sarcasm in the description. Cosimo sees the submission. I see the defiance. You remember the first time he spoke a quirky or fringe tidbit to you? It wasn't about the Bible or a classical statue. It was about the ancient Egyptian embalming process.
He told you with a grin that they used crocodile dung mixed with oil as a primitive form of sunscreen. Why? Because the dung had reflective properties, protecting the priests and pharaohs from the harsh sun during their desert rituals. You laughed, a low, nervous sound, and that shared moment of unexpected, bizarre knowledge sealed a bond that felt far more dangerous than any political conspiracy in Florence. Today, there is no time for jokes. He's troubled. The master has promised the Strozzi a set of wedding chests by the feast day. Wedding chests, or cassoni, were hugely expensive items, beautifully painted panels that celebrated the marriage and contained the bride's dowry. He's using cheaper tempera and skipping the final varnish to save time. It's a fraud. They will crack in 2 years. You lean against the workbench, the wood rough against your back. You watch his frustration. The Renaissance is built on this tension, the pursuit of artistic perfection clashing with the ruthless timetable of commerce. He is an artist in a craftsman's world, and his master is simply a businessman. You know the weight of the guild contract around Sandra's neck, the years of indentured servitude required before he can be certified as a master in his own right, able to open his own bottega and sign his own work. He grabs a small, clean piece of parchment and a stylus. Pose for me, just for a moment, not for him, but for me. The way you stand when you're not thinking. You obey naturally, easing your weight onto one foot, tilting your chin slightly. You look past him, out the high window, where you can see the deep ochre red of the city's rooftops against the brilliant sky. The moment is silent, charged only by the quick, decisive scratch of his stylus on the paper. He is not trying to capture the pious virgin. He's trying to capture the defiant soul behind the eyes. He's committing a small, rebellious act of art, stealing your essence away from the master's utilitarian commission. You are his secret subject, his true modella, and this charcoal sketch will be hidden between the pages of an old copy of Virgil, a silent declaration of a love that can barely be named yet. You understand, perhaps before he does, that your life is now bound to the dangerous, exhilarating path of this artist. The golden shadow of Florence falls over you both, promising great glory and utter ruin.
The danger wasn't just in the shadows of the alleyways, it was woven into the luxurious tapestries of power. You remember that day in the workshop, the charcoal sketch hidden away? The next afternoon, the master, Cosimo, returns from his haggling session, successful and, predictably, slightly more lubricated than usual. He is loud, demanding, and utterly absorbed in the only currency that matters in Florence: patronage. "The Medici," he bellows, gesturing expansively with a brush loaded with cheap vermilion. "They are the sun around which we, the lesser stars, must orbit." And he wasn't wrong. You can feel the presence of the Medici family everywhere, even when their palace is blocks away. Their control is not a blatant iron fist, it is rather a quiet grip, a soft velvet glove wrapped around the throat of the city. Their power, you realize, comes from their subtlety. While other powerful families like the Strozzi or the Pitti built towering fortresses and paraded soldiers, the Medici built libraries, commissioned art, and controlled the finances of the entire papacy. This is the sophisticated tyranny of culture. Cosimo sets you up on the posing platform, tossing a piece of heavy, dark blue drapery around your shoulders. You are to be a donor figure in a painting of the Annunciation. You must look humble, reverent, and utterly devoid of personality. You settle into the pose, focusing on slowing your breath, allowing your mind to drift. Sandro, mio pittore, is on his knees, grinding yellow ochre pigment. He keeps his eyes down, but you can feel his awareness of you, a palpable tension across the room. He is listening, too, because every word the master speaks about the Medici is a lesson in survival. They do not rule, you understand, Cosimo explains to the workshop, primarily to Sandro, because the master needs someone to lecture. They influence. They bankroll the Doges of Venice. They lend money to the King of France. They do not need to sit on a visible throne. They sit in the control room. The mainstream historical fact that defines this era is the unofficial rule of the Medici, particularly Lorenzo de' Medici, known as the Magnificent. He never held the formal title of prince or king. He was technically just a banker and an influential citizen, yet his power was absolute. He maintained control through strategic marriages, control of the city council, signoria, and most importantly, by becoming the ultimate patron of the arts, shaping the aesthetic landscape of the entire Renaissance. He was the de facto ruler, ruling by cultural and economic consent rather than brute military force. You watch Sandro nod, wiping a stray streak of yellow from his cheek. He knows that every artist's dream, and their danger, lies in attracting the notice of Lorenzo. An artist needs Medici money to buy that coveted, expensive ultramarine, but to work for them means submitting your genius to their political agenda. Later that week, Cosimo secures a small commission for a lesser Medici cousin, a fresco decoration in a small private chapel. It's an enormous undertaking for the bottega. Sandro is elevated from pigment grinder to chief preparatory artist. This means he is responsible for preparing the wall, a crucial, time-sensitive process. You are no longer just the Virgin. You are now the secret muse for every female figure in the chapel, the early, unsettling role you've come to accept. You pose as Mary Magdalene weeping at the foot of the cross, as a lesser saint holding a palm frond, and even, once daringly, as a Roman sibyl with a scroll. Sandro paints you, again and again, hiding your true features, darkening your hairline, softening your jawline, making your eyes slightly wider, but always maintaining the essential truth of your expression. During one of these clandestine sessions, held after dark when Cosimo is at the tavern, Sandro allows you a closer look at his tools. He's meticulous, almost obsessive about his materials. "See this?" he whispers, holding up a delicate, almost painfully thin brush made of marten hair. "It's for the eyelashes, the last most subtle detail." You lean close, inhaling the scent of him, linseed oil, sweat, and something faintly musky, like dried herbs. He's explaining the process of fresco, painting onto wet plaster. The pigment bonds with the wall as the plaster dries. It's permanent. A portrait in oil can be changed, scraped off, forgotten. But fresco? That is for eternity. This permanence feels both exhilarating and terrifying. Your face, disguised but present, is being literally baked into the walls of a Florentine chapel. Your secret love is becoming immortalized as holy figures, a deception that only the two of you share.
"What if they recognize me?" you ask, the question a fearful whisper. He looks up from the wall, his eyes dark in the low lantern light. They won't. They only see what they expect to see. A saint, a virtue. They don't look for the fire. He touches the point where your neck meets your shoulder, the line he is currently painting on the Sibyl figure. His touch is light, professional, yet utterly electric. It's the closest thing to a caress you will ever receive in the studio. He once told you, a quirky or fringe tidbit, that the best tempera paint used egg yolk not just for binding, but because the protein gave the finished colors slight, luminous sheen. He explained that some artists secretly believed the eggs used must be from hens that had been fed a specific diet, almonds and figs, to enhance the yolk's quality. You smile, remembering the time he tried to sneak a stolen fig to the master's tempera hen, only to be caught and soundly cuffed for the attempt. Cosimo is negotiating with the Dominicans at San Marco, Sandro informs you, his voice suddenly practical. They want a new sacra conversation for the refectory. Large scale. He's already bragging about the money.
The mention of the Dominican friars, particularly those at the monastery of San Marco, brings a chill. San Marco is the home of Fra Savonarola, a powerful, charismatic preacher whose sermons are growing increasingly strident. He denounces the humanism, the materialism, and the pagan imagery now rampant in Florentine art. He preaches fire and damnation, and his growing influence represents a direct threat to the very world Sandro and the other artists inhabit. Art, for Savonarola, is vanity. You ask Sandro about the use of gold in the master's paintings. Cosimo uses thin gold leaf to denote heavenly light and halos, a traditional, guaranteed way to please a patron. "It's easy," Sandra scoffs, grinding a bit of charcoal in his mortar. "It's lazy. Gold is shiny, but it doesn't glow." This leads to a fascinating discussion you shared, one that remains an active, unsettled area of art history. Historians still argue whether the move away from gold leaf backgrounds and towards natural atmospheric landscapes was driven primarily by aesthetic preference, a rediscovery of classical painting techniques, which didn't use gold, or simply the economic reality that finally rendered landscape was often cheaper than copious amounts of gold leaf. Sandro, of course, insists it's about truth. The sky glows, not the surface of the painting, he'd stated with the fierce conviction of youth. The burden of being Sandro's muse is your necessity to maintain utter silence and perfect stillness. Your existence in the studio is in effect a secret transgression against the social order. An unmarried woman spending hours alone with a young male apprentice would be scandalous, potentially ruinous. You're not a courtesan, nor are you a relative. You are simply inspiration. A hidden catalyst, and your secret role as a muse gives Sandro the necessary truth he requires to elevate the master's pedestrian religious work. He needs to paint conviction, and he finds it in the private moments you share, moments stolen under the quiet, controlling shadow of the Medici. The fresco work drags on. The wall must be painted section by section, giornata, and the pressure on Sandro is immense. He's working 12, sometimes 15 hours a day. You find yourself doing more than just posing. You bring him water, wipe the sweat from his brow, and even mix small custom batches of color for him, a service that would earn you an instant dismissal or, worse, a beating if Cosimo discovered it. One evening, exhausted, Sandro rests his head against the cool, damp plaster of the wall, right beside the half-finished face of the Sibyl. Your face. "I hate that I have to hide you," he murmurs, his voice barely audible. "I want to paint you, just you, without the robes, without the halo, just the reality of the woman who knows too much about crocodile dung sunscreen." You chuckle softly. The mention of the weird Egyptian fact provided a moment of comforting normalcy in the abnormal secrecy of your situation. You realize that your value to him is not simply aesthetic, it is intellectual, emotional, and utterly necessary for his artistic soul. He sees the defiance, and in this city of rigid expectations and Medici control, defiance is the most dangerous and most beautiful thing he could possibly paint. Your role is unsettling, yes, but it is also the beginning of an immortality known only to the two of you.
The idealized vision of the Renaissance, the one you read about in dusty academic texts, often skips the part where everything smells faintly of goat urine and stale beer. Now, as Sandro's clandestine muse, you are immersed in the true reality of the bottega, a world defined by pigment and penance. It is a place where sublime beauty is wrenched from the most difficult, earthy materials. You spend your mornings in the back room, the light filtered and dusty, grinding. The sound of the mortar and pestle, a heavy stone basin and a long, thick wooden rod, is the rhythmic, monotonous soundtrack to your secret life. This is the visceral, often messy detail of the artist's life. Look down at your hands. They are stained, permanently etched with the colors you process. Lapis lazuli for ultramarine is easy to crush, but ruinously expensive. The grinding is done slowly, carefully, to avoid any waste.
The earth pigments, the ochres, the siennas, the umbers, are gritty and coarse, demanding muscle and patience. But the most dangerous pigments? They are the ones that demand a certain penance from the grinder. Sandro taught you about orpiment, a vibrant, dazzling yellow, often used to depict gold or rich drapery. But grinding orpiment releases arsenic sulfide dust. You have to wear a cloth across your mouth and nose, a primitive mask, slightly uncomfortable and stifling. But even then, the fine, acrid dust settles in your lungs. Similarly, the brilliant cinnabar, or vermilion red, is derived from mercury sulfide. It's gorgeous, seductive, and fatally poisonous. You are literally manufacturing beauty out of toxic minerals. It costs us a little piece of our soul, doesn't it? Sandro had observed one rainy afternoon, watching you work the mortar. He wasn't being dramatic. He was stating a fact of his profession. The creation of such stunning beauty demands a physical toll, a quiet sacrifice that history rarely records. The mainstream historical fact that most people forget is that Renaissance artists were first and foremost master chemists and engineers. They didn't just buy tubes of paint, they manufactured it from raw, natural ingredients, minerals, plants, insects, and even animal parts. The technical skill required to prepare the gesso, a mixture of plaster and glue, for the wooden panel, to stretch the canvas properly and to formulate stable, long-lasting paint was as revered as the artistic vision itself. This was not a hobby. It was an industrial process. The contrast is stark, the sublime purity of the finished face of the Virgin you pose as, and the harsh, physical labor involved in creating her luminous skin tones. The workshop is always chilly, save for the area near the small furnace where they boil glue from animal hides. This glue, mixed with chalk, forms the foundation of the gesso that makes the wooden panel as smooth as ivory. One afternoon, you are sanding a large cypress wood panel, the finest material used for altarpieces. It's a mindless, exhausting job, ensuring the surface is absolutely flawless before the gesso layers are applied. Sandra works beside you, preparing a set of small portrait panels, meticulously scraping off dried gesso that is pooled at the edges. "Did you know," he says, his voice low over the rasping sound of the sanding, "that the richest blue in the Roman mosaics, the one that still shines today, was made using ground-up glass?" This is your quirky or fringe tidbit for the section. He explains that smalt, a cobalt glass pigment, was an attempt to find a cheaper, less toxic alternative to ultramarine. He's always seeking these secrets, historical hacks that might give him an edge, or more often, just satisfy his intense curiosity about the material world. He explains that many Renaissance artists look back to Pliny the Elder and other classical texts, desperate to rediscover the lost secrets of Roman painting, which were supposedly superior to contemporary techniques. Messer Cosimo only cares if the patron thinks the blue is expensive, Santo sighs, flipping a small panel over. I want the blue to be the best blue, regardless of the price. You realize that his entire struggle is contained in that statement, the harsh economic realities of working for a master who prioritizes profit versus Sandro's uncompromising artistic integrity. You ask him about the brushes, the precision tools used to apply the toxic pigments. He shows you a set. Small, fine brushes made from the tail of a sable, carefully preserved in a box lined with velvet. These are like instruments for a surgeon, he tells you. Each hair is positioned for a specific purpose. You cannot paint the truth of a shadow with a cheap hog's bristle brush. You notice the thin, almost transparent skin stretched over a small wooden frame, a stencil. Cosimo uses these stencils, or spolveri, to quickly transfer standard poses or repetitive elements, like hands or common drapery folds, onto his panels. It saves time, he says, with a hint of bitterness in his voice, but it kills the freshness. He paints the same hand on the Virgin and the Magdalene. He is copying himself. And here lies the heart of the open scholarly debate phrase. Historians still argue whether the extensive use of workshop aids like spolveri, pricked cartoons used for tracing, and pattern books stifled true artistic innovation, or if they were simply efficient tools necessary to meet the overwhelming demand for art in Renaissance society. Did the structure of the bottega promote mass production over individual genius? Sandro certainly believes it did. He vows that when he is a master, every line will be drawn fresh, every figure unique. The weight of the commission, you notice, is starting to affect Sandro's mood. He is required to paint the face of a particularly stern-looking bishop onto a large panel that will hang in a church near the Arno. The master insists the bishop must be portrayed with an almost sanctimonious piety. As you help clean his palette one evening, scrubbing the oils with turpentine and a handful of sand, a task that leaves your hands smelling chemically sharp, Sandro drops his guard. "I cannot make his face look humble," he admits, rubbing his temples, exhausted. "I know the man is a greedy hypocrite. If I paint his true nature, Cosimo will lose the commission, and I will lose my teeth." You carefully mix a small batch of ivory black, made from charred bones, and place it on his palette. You realize that your value to him now extends beyond posing. You are his confessor, his moral compass in a profession that constantly demands compromise. "Paint the light in his eyes, not the piety," you suggest quietly. "The way a flame looks just before it goes out. They will see the light, and you will know it is the exhaustion of his sin." He looks up, a flash of appreciation in his tired eyes. "You are dangerous, you know that," he whispers. This whole arrangement, the secret pose, the shared knowledge of toxins and techniques, the private jokes like remembering that crocodile dung sunscreen he mentioned, a joke that he still sometimes uses when a patron's skin tone is particularly difficult to match, all of it constitutes your own private rebellion against the constraints of Florentine society. You are the hidden truth behind the painted lie. As the evening concludes, and you prepare to leave the messy twilight of the studio for the cold, dark street, Sandro hands you a small, polished piece of marble. It's slightly warm from his hand. "It's a grinding stone," he says. "But look closely. Under the dim lantern light, you see that he has etched a tiny, almost invisible line into the stone. A single, clean, perfect curve. The arc of a smile that isn't pious, but genuinely happy. Keep it safe," he instructs. A reminder of what the work is really for. Not for the gold leaf, but for the truth you can grind from the rock. You tuck the stone away, a heavy, permanent reminder of the sacrifice and the secret beauty being forged in this chaotic, dangerous workshop, paid for by the penance of those who toil in the dust of pigments.
The stench of arsenic and the gritty texture of raw earth pigments start to fade as you follow Sandro into a different kind of Florentine darkness, the one lit by clandestine lanterns and fueled by forbidden ideas. The pressure of the workshop, the never-ending grind of pigment, and the tyranny of Messer Cosimo's deadlines forced Sandro to seek refuge, and he brought you with him into the scholar's secret garden. This garden is not a place of manicured hedges, but a private chamber tucked away in the sprawling house of a minor, yet intellectually influential, silk merchant named Galeazzo. Galeazzo is a quiet patron of the arts, but more significantly, he is a dedicated student of the classics and a devotee of the rapidly accelerating intellectual movement known as humanism. You remember the first night you walked into that room. The air was warm, scented not with turpentine, but with beeswax and the dry, ancient smell of parchment. There was no gold leaf or painted halo here. Instead, there were stacks of books, unrolled scrolls and bound volumes piled everywhere like intellectual bricks. This room represents the intellectual current of humanism, a movement that sought to revive the values, learning, and artistic styles of classical antiquity, putting humankind, rather than just the divine, at the center of inquiry. You sit quietly in a corner, ostensibly helping to sort loose folios, but really you're listening, absorbing the intense, fevered conversation. Sandro, surprisingly articulate when freed from the studio, is not just talking about painting, he's talking about philosophy, about Plato. The ideal form exists, not just in God's mind, but in the memory of the artist, Sandro argues, gesturing passionately. The challenge is not to copy the saint, but to capture the essential virtue that makes her worthy of sainthood. This is radical stuff. The church-mandated art focused on dogma, sin, and salvation.
Humanism, spurred by the influx of forbidden texts recovered from Constantinople or translated anew, focused on human potential, civic duty, and the glory of the terrestrial world. The texts they are studying, works by Cicero, Livy, and critically Plato, had been largely lost or ignored in Western Europe for 1,000 years. The mainstream historical fact of this intellectual revolution is the widespread recovery of classical Greek and Roman texts. This influx, often funded by the Medici, who, paradoxically, were also keen patrons of the religious art that humanism often challenged, fundamentally shifted the focus of learning from scholastic theology to studia humanitas, grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, and moral philosophy. Galeazzo, the host, leans forward, his spectacles glinting in the candlelight. He introduces a concept known as Neoplatonism, a synthesis of Christian theology and Platonic philosophy then popular in the Medici intellectual circles. He explains that earthly beauty is merely a reflection of divine beauty, and that the appreciation of beautiful forms, like the human body or a well-composed painting, is a step on the ladder toward understanding God. You watch Sandro's face light up with intense comprehension. This philosophy provides the intellectual justification for his artistic rebellion. He doesn't need to paint a stylized, distant virgin. He can paint your real, vibrant form and argue that its beauty is in itself a reflection of the divine. You realize this is why he insists on capturing the fire in your eyes. He is seeking the Platonic ideal, not the Catholic dogma. Your shared knowledge deepens into something far beyond the practical secrets of the bottega. You start to read small passages in translation together, a sonnet from Petrarch, a stanza from Ovid's Metamorphoses. You discuss the Roman concept of virtus, moral excellence, not just simple virtue, in the Greek pursuit of arete, reaching your fullest potential. One evening, you are sorting a massive collection of architectural sketches. Galeazzo is obsessed with Roman temples. Sandro points to a meticulously drawn study of a classical sculpture. "You see the neck?" he asks, tracing the line with a gentle, non-toxic stylus. It is strong, column-like, yet elegant. It doesn't just hold the head, it suggests intellect. You look at the sketch, and then you touch your own neck, the exact angle that Cosimo demands be painted as humble submission, but which Sandro sees as intellectual strength. This philosophical discussion has changed how Sandro views your body, transforming it from a mere posable object into an expression of classical ideals. During a discussion about mythological subjects, Venus and Mars, Apollo and Daphne, Sandro shares a small, quirky or fringe tidbit. He mentions that the Romans believed a mixture of goat's milk and saffron was the perfect wash for skin, giving it a luminous golden tone. He tells you he tried to convince Cosimo to use it on a canvas, suggesting it was an ancient technique, but Cosimo just scoffed, saying, "Egg yolk is cheaper, boy. Stick to the yolk." You smile, the familiarity of his studio struggles providing a comforting counterpoint to the high-flown philosophy. The danger of these gatherings is very real. While humanism is tolerated by the Medici, the extreme secularization and the reading of certain anti-clerical texts could easily be deemed heresy by the increasingly powerful Dominican order. The clandestine circles keep their doors bolted and their voices low, knowing that a single accusation could lead to the loss of their books, their livelihoods, and potentially their lives. Sandro asks you about a common theme in the text they are reading, the idea of transcendence, the ability to rise above one's station. "I am an apprentice," he says, folding his arms, leaning back against a massive bound volume of Pliny's Natural History. How does an artist transcend this? You reply quietly, recalling a line you read in a translation of Seneca. By making the temporary permanent, by making a mortal face into an immortal idea. He stares at you, and the lamplight catches the intensity in his eyes. He is realizing that his true artistic freedom lies not in breaking the contract with Cosimo, but in subverting it. By using the master's religious commissions to paint the humanist truth he finds in you. The deepening bond is forged in these secret hours, based not on superficial romance, but on a dangerous, shared intellectual journey. This connection to classical ideals inevitably leads to a key heart historical puzzle. Historians still argue whether the Renaissance embrace of ancient mythology, like painting Venus instead of the Virgin, was a sincere religious revival of paganism, a purely aesthetic choice to explore the beauty of the nude form, or a way for patrons to discreetly signal their intellectual, humanist credentials while maintaining a public face of piety. For Sandro, it seems to be all three, an intellectual liberation disguised as a stylistic preference. As you leave the secret garden, the air outside is cold and damp, a jarring return to the reality of the 15th century street. But you carry the warmth of the room with you. You carry the idea that you are not just a body for hire, but the intellectual embodiment of Sandro's quest for a rate. You recall one more of Sandro's observations, made while discussing the classical use of marble sculpture. He noted that the Greeks would often paint their statues in bright, vivid colors, a mainstream historical fact that always shocks the modern mind accustomed to pure white marble. He finds this idea fascinating, the concept of combining perfect form with dazzling realistic color. He tells you he wants to bring that kind of dynamic, living color back into his work, using the luminous, challenging pigments he still grinds for Cosimo. You walk through the dark streets, the rhythm of your steps quiet against the stones, the smooth marble grinding stone from the previous section, remember that grinding stone he gave you? Heavy and comforting in your pocket. The secret has deepened. It is no longer just a hidden affair, it is a shared philosophical mission. You are his Venus, his Sibyl, his intellectual equal, all hidden under the cloak of a humble modella within a city whose every stone is watched by the quietly controlling Medici's quiet grip.
The intellectual fire you discovered in Galeazzo's secret garden now faces the cold, calculating demands of a major commission. Messer Cosimo secured the contract, a significant altarpiece for the Church of Santa Trinita, depicting the Annunciation. This is the moment when the Archangel Gabriel announces to the Virgin Mary that she will conceive the Son of God. It is a work demanding both piety and perfection. The master, predictably, is in a frenzy, obsessed with the details of payment and framing. But for Sandro mio pupore, this panel represents a crucial test. He is responsible for the figures themselves, especially the Virgin, and you are his model. The creation of this public painting of a religious figure becomes the ultimate high-stakes cover for your secret relationship. You pose for hours in the drafty, silent bottega, dressed in the heavy, rich blue folds of the Virgin's mantle. The pose is conventional, head slightly bowed in acceptance, hands crossed over the breast in humble submission. This is how the church and the patron expect to see Mary. But Sandro is painting you. He applies the expensive, carefully ground ultramarine to the Virgin's robe, the color symbolizing purity and the heavens. As he works, focusing on the subtle turn of your wrist, the vulnerable curve of your neck, the one he studied in the classical sketches, he is forced to conceal your identity within the pious imagery.
He darkens your hair, raises your eyebrows slightly, making the face more generalized and conventionally beautiful. But he cannot change the deep, quiet knowledge in your eyes. That look, the one shared during the humanist discussions, is what he captures. It's the look of a woman who understands her destiny, not merely one who accepts a divine command without question. They will see submission, Sandro whispers, adding a minute highlight to your cheekbone. They will admire the gold leaf halo. They will not see the intellectual fire you bring to the role. This act of concealment is turning your secret love into a potential scandal waiting to be discovered. If anyone recognizes the features, if anyone connects the model for the virgin to the young woman who sometimes delivers cloth to the master's shop, it would not only ruin your reputation, but also cast doubt on the piety of the finished work, a potentially blasphemous association that could earn Sandro the suspicion of heresy. The mainstream historical fact about Renaissance altarpieces is their function as devotional objects and political statements. Patrons commissioned them not just for spiritual merit, but to assert their family's wealth, piety, and social standing. The quality of the pigments, especially the amount of ultramarine or gold used, the skill of the artist, and the prominence of the placement all reflected directly on the donor. Cosimo is painfully aware that this altarpiece is a statement piece for a wealthy patron, meaning any flaw or scandal would be amplified. Sandro, however, is obsessed with making the figures feel real. He's painting Mary's hands, not as stylized, elongated pointers, but as the strong, capable hands of a young woman, hands that have felt the chill of the evening air and the grit of the mortar. He says one day, "I paint the truth of the texture. If the hands don't look like they could actually work, how can they hold the Son of God?" This obsession with physical reality leads to a private conversation. You recall his earlier comment about the Roman use of milk and saffron for skin tone. Now he tells you a quirky or fringe tidbit about the early use of oil paint. He explains that some Northern European masters, whose techniques were slowly filtering into Italy, would mix crushed dried insects, cochineal, with oil to create a deep, vibrant red pigment, often used for Christ's blood or the lips of the Virgin. The startling source of the color, a tiny creature, highlights the strange chemical alchemy inherent in his art. The greatest challenge for Sandro, however, is the composition's setting. The Annunciation traditionally takes place in a simple, enclosed courtyard, symbolizing Mary's purity. Sandro, inspired by the humanist ideas of virtus and classical architecture, wants the scene to unfold in a perfectly rendered classical Roman courtyard with columns and coffered ceilings. He is meticulously painting the scene using the rules of linear perspective they discussed. He's using geometry to create the illusion of infinite space, a technique that symbolizes the vastness of the divine mystery. The Annunciation is a miracle of space and time, he explains, using a ruler to check the recession lines. The archangel is physically there, in our world, in our dimension. I must prove that dimension exists. This attention to realistic space, though a mark of Renaissance sophistication, creates a scholarly conundrum. Historians still argue whether the increasing use of mathematically precise linear perspective, which makes the viewer feel like they are inside the painted world, served to make religious scenes more emotionally accessible and pious for the average believer, or if it was actually a secular humanist boast, a way for the artist and the patron to demonstrate their intellectual mastery over geometry and the material world. Sandro, standing squarely in the middle of this debate, insists it's about making the miraculous believable. The intensity of the Annunciation Commission means that the hours you spend posing are longer and more exposed. Cosimo, pleased by the progress and the money pouring in, is often absent, attending to other clients or suppliers, but other apprentices and occasionally wealthy patrons visit the workshop. One afternoon, a sharp-eyed apprentice from a rival workshop stops by. He examines the nearly finished face of the Virgin closely. "A beautiful modella," he remarks to Sandro, a sly, knowing glance in your direction. "The curve of the neck is very particular. I feel I have seen it somewhere before." Sandro, without missing a beat, holds up his martenhair brush, his voice smooth and professional. "It is the perfect angle for submission, is it not? A classical line, taken from a Roman sarcophagus Master Cosimo acquired." He deliberately deflects the observation from you to a piece of studio property. A clever, instantaneous lie that saves the moment. You marvel at his quick thinking, the way he uses his humanist knowledge as a shield. You remember the feeling of that moment, the sweat breaking out on your back, the sudden, overwhelming realization of the risk you are taking. You are not just a muse, you are an active participant in a great artistic and emotional deception. The final element of the painting is the Archangel Gabriel. Sandra has painted him with a sense of urgent, dynamic movement. He is kneeling, but his robe is still billowing as if he just arrived, the air displaced by his flight. This contrast, the stillness of the accepting Virgin and the sudden dramatic presence of the messenger, makes the painting vibrant. When the master finally returns to inspect the finished figures, he is beaming. "Perfection, Sandro, true piety. The patron will weep." He does not see the subversion. He does not see the defiant intelligence you exchanged with the painter. He only sees the successful execution of a contract. The pious image, bought and paid for by a wealthy Florentine, has now a beautiful, elaborate veil for your illicit love. The face of the Virgin, about to be immortalized on a public church wall, is the disguised portrait of Mio Pittore's secret heart. As the massive panel is carefully crated for delivery, Sandro pulls you aside in the suddenly empty workshop. He is tired, but exhilarated. "They will call it pious," he whispers, taking your hand for just a second, a fleeting, forbidden contact. But every time they look at the Virgin's eyes, they are looking at the woman who taught me what true virtus looks like. The saint and the scandal are one. You know then that the time in Florence is nearing its end. The intensity of your secret, immortalized on a church wall, feels too great to sustain in the shadow of the Medici.
The tension created by the Annunciation altarpiece, the sublime piety on the surface, the dangerous truth concealed beneath, becomes too much for Florence to contain. The city, once Sandro's boundless inspiration, now feels like a cage, its magnificent walls closing in. The master, Cosimo, is basking in the glow of the successful commission, oblivious to the fact that his greatest religious work is actually a portrait of heresy. But the air is shifting, growing colder and more suspicious. The rising voice of Savonarola and the sharp eyes of rivals make your secret existence in the bottega untenable. One cool, late afternoon, Sandro rushes into the workshop, his face pale and drawn. He doesn't look like an artist. He looks like a man fleeing a fire. "We are leaving," he states, his voice low and urgent, devoid of his usual gentle sarcasm. "Tonight, to Venice." A specific incident has precipitated this. A minor, spiteful apprentice, the one who commented on the particular curve of your neck, remember that rival apprentice who almost recognized you? Had been caught by the master stealing a small quantity of costly verdigris pigment. To save himself from a beating, the apprentice tried to barter with the one thing he possessed, a dangerous secret.
He hinted to Cosimo that Sandro was spending unauthorized hours with a model, and that the model's face bore an unseemly resemblance to the Virgin in the new altarpiece. The accusation, though vague, was enough. Cosimo, a man who valued profit above all, panicked at the potential scandal that could ruin his reputation with the powerful Santa Trinita patrons. Cosimo, instead of confronting Sandro directly, gave him a cryptic warning, a veiled threat that revealed the severity of the situation without sacrificing the master's own plausible deniability. Sandro understood immediately. He had to disappear, and you had to go with him. The flight is urgent. You pack only what you can carry. A few essential changes of clothes, the small polished grinding stone Sandro gave you, that heavy piece of marble, remember? And most importantly, Sandro's precious hidden sketchbooks, filled with drawings of you and his humanist architectural studies. The journey begins in the dark, through the gates of Florence, avoiding the main routes. You travel east, initially on horseback, then continuing by riverboat, following the Arno toward the sea. The urgent escape to Venice is not a romantic adventure. It is exhausting, nerve-wracking survival. You trudge through muddy fields, share crowded, uncomfortable barges, and subsist on stale bread and hard cheese. Every distant sound, the barking of a dog, the clatter of a passing merchant's cart, make you both jump. The mainstream historical fact of travel in Renaissance Italy was that it was slow, expensive, and dangerous. Bandits were common, but the greater danger was the risk of being caught between warring city-states or even local feuds. The journey from Florence to Venice, while navigable, was a considerable undertaking, often taking more than a week, involving a mix of river travel and passage through the Apennine Mountains. As you move away from the solid stone and sun-drenched architecture of Tuscany, the landscape begins to change. The air grows noticeably cooler, heavier with moisture. The terrain flattens, giving way to marshes and wetlands, eventually opening up to the Adriatic coast. You reach the lagoon city, and the stark contrast in culture hits you like a blast of cold, salty air. Florence was vertical, dominated by its dome and towers, built upon the solid foundation of banking and earth. Venice is horizontal, a city built on water, defying gravity and logic. The sounds are different too. Instead of the rhythmic clopping of hooves and the clatter of iron wheels, the city is defined by the soft, rhythmic splash of oars and the musical cries of the boatmen. The light is diffused, silvery, reflecting off the water everywhere, creating an entirely different atmosphere for an artist. "Look," Sandro murmurs as your hired traghetto glides into the Grand Canal, passing palazzi built directly out of the water, shimmering with intricate Byzantine mosaics and exotic marble. Florence is gold, Venice is pearl. Venetian society is equally distinct. In Florence, power was controlled by the bankers and the church. Here, power is controlled by the Doge, the elected head of state, and the maritime merchant aristocracy, whose fortunes are literally tied to the sea trade with the East. The atmosphere is more liberal, more cosmopolitan, and less immediately stifled by the rigid piety of the Florentine Dominicans. They trade spices and silks and secrets, Sandro observes, excitement replacing his anxiety. It's a city of surfaces, of reflections. They love color and texture here, not just the stark geometry of Rome. This initial exhilaration quickly gives way to the practical challenges of sustaining a secret relationship in a new city. You are still fleeing a potential scandal, and Venice, while seeming more relaxed, is a vast, complex web of gossip and surveillance. Sandro must immediately find work. He finds a small, damped apartment high up near the Rialto Bridge, overlooking a narrow canal, a far cry from the bustling structured bottega in Florence. He cannot present himself as a master, as he hasn't completed his servitude under Cosimo. He is forced to take low-paying work, grinding pigments and preparing canvas, for a very different kind of master, a successful, established Venetian painter who specializes in rich, oil-based color and sensual themes. The Venetian style is a shock to Sandro's Florentine training. Florentine art prioritized disegno, drawing and line, and intellectual composition. Venetian art prioritized colore, color and light, and atmospheric effects. Sandro, still a humanist at heart, struggles to adapt to the Venetian preference for oil paint over the egg tempera he perfected under Cosimo. Oil is slower to dry, allowing for subtle blending and the creation of deep, luminous, jewel-like colors. He tells you a quirky or fringe tidbit about the Venetian method of preparing canvas. Unlike the hard, smooth wooden panels of Florence, Venetians preferred canvas, which was readily available from their massive shipyards. To make the canvas water-resistant and stiff, they would mix a paste using plaster and linseed oil, and sometimes incredibly fine flour, which they then applied to the fabric. They treat a painting surface like a ship's sail or a bread dough to make it both tough and flexible. The secret of your relationship continues, but the terms have changed. You are less his static, classical model and more his active partner in survival. You help him stretch and prime the massive canvases now required by Venetian patrons. You also serve as his emotional anchor against the artistic disorientation of the Venetian style. The constant dampness and the different light start to wear on Sandro. He misses the crisp, clarifying light of Florence. This contrast in artistic approach leads to a new scholarly contention. Historians still argue whether the distinct articulate styles of the Venetian school focused on colore versus the Florentine school focused on disegno were primarily due to the different painting mediums available, canvas, oil in Venice versus panel, tempera in Florence, or if they simply reflected the inherent differences in the city's respective intellectual and cultural values, the practical, sensual East versus the intellectual, geometric West. Your challenge and your shared mission is to synthesize these two worlds. He must learn the color of Venice without abandoning the disegno and intellectual rigor of Florence. As he begins to experiment, painting your form on a canvas, no longer as the Virgin, but perhaps as a figure of Flora or a Roman sea nymph, the colors he uses are deeper, more vibrant, the shadows more atmospheric. This new medium, oil, provides a kind of artistic freedom that tempera never could. It allows him to blend skin tones, creating a living, breathing warmth that is intensely sensual. Your identity is now concealed not through subtle disguise, but through a new artistic language, the language of light and color, a language Venice understands, and more importantly, a language you both speak fluently. The sea salt air, the soft light, the ever-present water, it all feels like a sea salt promise of a different, perhaps safer future. But this is the Renaissance. Safety is an illusion. Your arrival in this powerful, strange city has undoubtedly caught the attention of those who trade in much higher stakes than mere art.
The watery lanes of Venice, though initially a source of artistic and personal freedom, quickly reveal their own complexities, leading you both straight into the gilded web of the Venetian state. Sandro, now struggling to master the oil-based colore of the local school, takes on a commission assisting a master for a decoration in the Doge's palace itself. This is where you encounter the Doge and the dilemma. The Doge, the elected chief magistrate of the Republic, is not a king, but the embodiment of Venice's immense wealth and formidable political structure. His palace is not just a residence, it is the heart of the most powerful maritime republic in Europe. Sandro is working on a ceiling panel, a complicated allegory glorifying Venice's dominion over the sea. You continue your role as a muse, posing for minor allegorical figures, a river god, a personification of trade, or perhaps, daringly, a subdued figure of fortuna, fortune. But you are no longer in the privacy of a small Florentine bottega. You are in the airy, enormous workshop near the Arsenale shipyards, surrounded by dozens of competing artists, apprentices, and, most unnervingly, the watchful eyes of the Doge's own secretaries and bureaucrats. The mainstream historical fact about the Doge's palace commissions is their sheer scale and political purpose. The art inside the palace was designed to convey the absolute stability and divine favor of the Venetian Republic. Every painting, every fresco was a piece of propaganda, reinforcing the official myth that Venice was a unique, divinely ordained state, a serene and powerful merchant empire. Sandro's Venetian master, a man named Tiziano, not that Tiziano, but a competent, well-connected elder of the name, notices your singular stillness and the intensity you bring to your poses. He is impressed, and he mentions you directly to the Doge himself, who makes a rare, unscheduled visit to the workshop. The Doge, an older man with shrewd eyes and a heavy velvet cap, observes Sandro's work, but his gaze lingers on you. He doesn't see a secret lover or a humanist intellectual. He sees a perfect, passive vessel for the state's iconography. He praises your classic, obedient farm, a terrifying echo of how the Florentine master, Cosimo, viewed you. The Doge suggests a new project, a massive painting, ostensibly about the judgment of Paris, but really an excuse to depict beautiful, allegorical nudes, a Venetian specialty. He doesn't directly commission Sandro, but he directs his master, Tiziano, to use Sandro's modella exclusively. This is a powerful patron taking a dangerously close interest in the artist's work, and by extension, in you. The dilemma for Sandro is agonizing. To be noticed by the Doge is to be guaranteed success, patronage, and wealth. It is the end of his struggle as an anonymous apprentice, but it means giving up control, sacrificing his artistic and emotional truth to the Venetian propaganda machine, and, most frighteningly, exposing you to the highest power in the Republic. He has traded the quiet grip of the Medici for the official, public embrace of the Doge. You notice the difference in the painting materials here. Sandro, finally mastering the Venetian style, is working almost exclusively in oils on massive canvas, layering thin, transparent glazes to achieve a luminous depth. He is using a new pigment, a brilliant, intense yellow called giallorino. He tells you a quirky or fringe tidbit about how this yellow is sometimes made, not just from mineral compounds, but by heating a mixture of lead and tin in a furnace, a process that had to be done carefully so as not to poison the entire workshop. He admits he prefers the earthy ochres of Florence, finding this artificial Venetian yellow too loud, too demanding. This constant public scrutiny and the political pressure from the Doge leads you to realize a key difference between the art of the two cities. Historians still argue whether Venetian art, with its emphasis on sumptuous color, texture, and the sensual depiction of the human body, was more focused on pure sensory pleasure and material celebration, appealing to the rich merchant class, or if its brilliant light and color were a sophisticated theological symbol of divine glory and the beauty of the created world. Sandro feels it's the former, all beautiful surfaces hiding an empty political core. One evening, while working late on the allegory, Sandro notices a small imperfection in the Doge's private study. He points out a faint stain on an older, monumental canvas depicting a naval battle. "Look closely at the water," he whispers to you, pulling you near. "See the blue? It's not fading, it's flaking. Too much cheap glue in the priming." This observation becomes your shared technical truth.
The mainstream historical fact concerning the preservation of Venetian art is that it often suffered due to the environmental conditions, the perpetual humidity and high salinity from the surrounding lagoon, which often caused paint to flake and canvases to rot, demanding constant and expensive restoration. It's a physical manifestation of Venice's inherent instability, beauty built on a liquid foundation. The dilemma culminates when the Doge's secretary approaches you, not Sandro, with a private gift of fine Murano beads, a seemingly innocent gesture, but laden with dangerous implication. The secretary is testing the waters, signaling the Doge's interest. You decline the gift politely, using the strictest language of formal propriety, insisting that you are merely the artist's dedicated assistant and muse. You choose to cling to the technical necessity of your role rather than accept a social position that could strip you of all autonomy. When you tell Sandro, he is both terrified and proud. He says, "You told the Doge's own eye to look away." His voice is a mixture of awe and fear. "We must work faster. We must finish this and disappear before the state claims you completely." You understand. The Doge's interest, though flattering to Sandro's career, is a new, more pervasive form of ownership. You are no longer just concealing a love affair. You're fighting the official appetite of a republic that views every beautiful thing, every ship, every spice, every body as property. The beautiful, treacherous world of Venice's sea salt promise has turned into a shimmering trap.
The silver, watery light of Venice, which once promised safety, now seems pale in the face of the encroaching darkness of fanaticism spreading from Florence. News travels slowly, but surely along the trading routes, and the name that is on every Florentine's, and now every worried Venetian's tongue, is Savonarola. Fra Savonarola, the Dominican friar from San Marco, remember the monastery near Florence, has achieved a terrifying level of political and religious power back in Tuscany. He has successfully fueled a populist movement demanding moral cleansing, denouncing the luxurious humanism, the pagan themes, and the excessive wealth that funded the Renaissance. His influence is now casting a long shadow of Savonarola that reaches even into the cosmopolitan, supposedly secular, heart of Venice. The mood changes. The opulent, sensual commissions that were the pride of the Doge's palace begin to feel dangerous. Patrons, including the Doge himself, start demanding more penitent, less classical, less nude figures. They are terrified that the Florentine fire, the literal bonfire of the vanities, might consume their city next. You and Sandro feel the shift acutely. He is still working under the Venetian master, now hastily painting over a beautiful, sensual depiction of Jupiter and Io, replacing it with a far duller, more acceptable depiction of St. Jerome. They fear God's judgment more than the Doge's wrath, Sandro mutters, his brushstrokes frustrated. And God, for them, now wears the cowl of a Dominican friar. This moment forces you and Sandro to confront the ultimate risk of their illicit love. Savonarola's movement targets what he calls idols, mirrors, musical instruments, fancy clothes, scandalous books, and crucially, any art that depicts mythological figures or the nude form. Your entire relationship, founded on the humanist ideas of beauty, classicism, and the private, passionate pursuit of art, is exactly what Savonarola seeks to destroy. Your disguised portraits, the ones he painted in Florence and the more sensual ones he is creating here, could be seen as heresy and idolatry, grounds for severe punishment. The mainstream historical fact concerning Savonarola is the Bonfire of the Vanities, which took place in Florence in 1497. Driven by the Dominicans' rhetoric, citizens, including some artists like Sandro Botticelli, whose style became much more sober, brought thousands of sinful objects, artworks, books, cosmetics, and mirrors to the Piazza della Signora and burned them.
This event marked a devastating, albeit temporary, setback for the humanist movement and the flourishing of secular art in Florence. Sandro is torn. His artistic soul rebels against the friar's asceticism, but his humanist knowledge tells him that political and religious fervor, once ignited, burns indiscriminately. He tells you a quirky or fringe tidbit that perfectly encapsulates his fear. He recalls that during one of the early bonfires, a wealthy merchant, terrified of being accused, threw an extremely rare illuminated manuscript into the flames, a first-century copy of Catullus's love poetry. The loss of that single, irreplaceable classical text was for Sandro a greater tragedy than the destruction of any amount of silk. He says, "They are burning history itself," despair in his voice. The Doge, concerned about maintaining stability, implements a series of outwardly pious measures, including increased surveillance of foreign residents, especially those from Florence. The net is tightening. One chilly evening, as you are preparing Sandro's canvas with the new, required penitent wash, he discusses the future of art. He says, "If Savonarola wins, art will be nothing more than a stained glass window, only instruction, no inspiration, no virtus," using the Latin term you both learned in Galeazza's Sacred Garden. Remember the discussions on virtus? You remind him of the humanist idea of transcendence, of making a mortal face into an immortal idea. "Then I must paint a final idea," he says, his gaze distant, "one that no religious fire can touch. I must paint the defiance." This leads to a crucial philosophical discussion, one that connects back to the core of the Renaissance debate. Historians still argue whether the extreme piety of the Savonarolan era forced a true and lasting moral change in Italian society, or if it was simply a politically motivated temporary reaction against excess that quickly faded once the friar himself was executed. For Sandro, the answer is irrelevant. The threat is real, and the potential for the destruction of the beautiful secular world they built together is immediate. He looks at the figure of St. Jerome he is painting, a figure of penance and scholarship. He is using your hands as the model, but this time he paints them holding a small rolled-up scroll, not a Bible, but a subtle representation of the knowledge you both cherish. He is subtly subverting the pious theme, using the figure of the saint to honor the scholar. The intensity of the looming separation is palpable. You know that if the Venetian authorities or a Savonarolan sympathizer discovers your presence and your illicit role, the consequences will be dire: imprisonment, or worse, the same fate as the art they are burning. You cannot stay here and expose Sandro to this risk as he is on the cusp of becoming a recognized artist. Sandro, recognizing this necessity, starts to lay the groundwork for a dramatic, definitive artistic statement, a final act of devotion and rebellion. He begins preparing a massive, perfect canvas, carefully treated against the Venetian dampness, not for a patron, but for himself. He uses the techniques he learned from the finest Venetians, the deep, oil-based color, but applies the intellectual rigor of Florentine disegno. "We came here to escape the shadow," he says, touching the heavy, wet canvas with the back of his finger, "but the shadow followed. Now we use the shadow to create the light. I will use the color of Venice, but I will paint the truth of Florence." You realize that this final, monumental piece, conceived against the backdrop of rising moral panic and fearing the bonfire of the vanities, will not be a virgin or a saint, but a portrait of the love that humanism made possible. It will be the ultimate, dangerous act of artistic defiance against the world that threatens to swallow you both.
With the shadow of Savonarola darkening the horizon, Sandro, mio pittore, embarks on the ultimate act of defiance, a portrait of the truth. This is the moment of the unfinished masterpiece. It is a project conceived in fear and executed in love, dedicated not to a powerful Doge or a wealthy Florentine patron, but to you, the woman whose existence validated his entire artistic and philosophical quest. He has secured a massive canvas, the type favored by the Venetians for their grand allegories, but he prepares it with the meticulous, time-consuming care of a Florentine master preparing a sacred altarpiece. This is to be his secular altarpiece, a defiant monument to humanism and human love. You pose for him in the privacy of your damp, small Venetian apartment, the light filtered and diffused by the nearby lagoon. This is the first time he paints you as yourself, entirely unconcealed. No virgin's robe, no Sibyl's scroll, no allegorical submission. You are dressed simply, perhaps in a deep burgundy dress, the color providing a perfect contrast to the luminous, pale quality of your skin that he achieves through the complex layering of oil glazes. This work is truly a portrait truly of you. He paints the intelligence in your eyes, the knowledge of arsenic dust, classical philosophy, and the intricate deceptions of the Florentine court. He paints the strength in your neck, the one he once compared to a classical column. Remember that discussion in Galeazzo's Secret Garden? He is capturing the definitive essence of your virtus. They can burn the silks and the mirrors, he murmurs, his focus absolute, his brush movement slow and precise. They can burn the pagan gods, but they cannot burn the truth of a human soul captured in light. This painting is a defiant act of love and creation against a backdrop of increasing danger. It is an assertion that beauty, truth, and love are as worthy of artistic commemoration as any saint or biblical scene. Sandro's technique is a magnificent synthesis of the two great schools. He uses the Venetian mastery of colore, the rich, atmospheric oil paints, layered to give the colors incredible depth and luminosity. But he applies them with the Florentine rigor of disegno, the precise, intellectual drawing, ensuring the anatomy and perspective are flawless. He wants the painting to be structurally perfect, an impenetrable fortress of technique against the rising tide of aesthetic puritanism. He is working on the background, painting a view that isn't recognizably Florence or Venice, but an idealized landscape, a philosophical garden of sorts. He includes a clear, perfect line of receding classical architecture, a nod to the linear perspective that was the hallmark of the Florentine Renaissance, but bathes it in the soft, atmospheric Venetian light, suggesting that the perfect humanist ideal can exist anywhere, if only the artist wills it. You ask him about the longevity of the work, given the dampness of the Venetian climate. Remember the problems with flaking paint in the Doge's palace? He tells you a quirky or fringe tidbit that reveals his meticulous planning. He explains that he is adding ground marble dust to his final layer of varnish, an old Roman technique that was believed to make the surface harder and more reflective, giving the painting a subtle, almost sculptural sheen that will protect it from the humidity. He is literally trying to make your portrait as durable as a classical statue. The mainstream historical fact that Sandro is unwittingly participating in is the shift in artistic patronage itself. While most great art was commissioned, the Renaissance saw the rise of the independent artist who created works for their own pleasure or based on speculation. This portrait, created outside the constraints of any contract, is an early and profound example of an artist claiming creative control and declaring that his muse and his passion are subjects worthy of the highest art, independent of the church or the state. He spends days on your hands, painting them not crossed in pious submission, but resting naturally,
one lightly holding the small, polished grinding stone he gave you, that smooth piece of marble that symbolized the truth he could grind from the rock, a powerful callback. This small detail is the final, undeniable code. Only you, the person who ran errands and ground pigments, would understand the significance of that heavy, simple stone in the hand of a woman of such intellect. The greatest challenge now is time. The whispers from Florence about the increasing power of the fanatical crowds are growing louder. Merchants are arriving in Venice with tales of public humiliations and escalating violence against those suspected of pagan vanity. One day, while Sandro is focused on the minute details of the lace trim on your sleeve, a small moment of lightness and beauty, he suddenly stops. Lowering his brush, he looks at you, his eyes filled with a desperate, heartbreaking love. He says, "I must stop. It is not finished. It cannot be finished." You are bewildered. The painting, to your eye, is almost complete, perhaps needing only the final varnish. "No," he explains, his gaze falling back to the canvas. "It is not finished. To finish it is to declare it permanent, to make it a fixed target. If it remains unfinished, it is still in the process of becoming. It is still mine and yours. It is too dangerous to complete the truth." He is making a conscious, devastating choice. By leaving a small, almost imperceptible portion of the background slightly rough, by leaving the very edges of the canvas unworked, he avoids declaring its final, public, and potentially blasphemous existence. The unfinished state is his final safety mechanism, his final rebellion. The ultimate bittersweet irony is that Sandro's fear touches on an enduring artistic question. Historians still argue whether some of the most famous, unfinished works of the Renaissance, often attributed to the artist's busy schedule or death, were actually left incomplete by the artist's own choice, a philosophical decision to avoid the tyranny of finality, or perhaps to leave a deliberate space for the viewer's imagination, a non-finito designed to suggest infinite potential. For Sandro, the choice is entirely pragmatic. It's a way to protect the subject. The moment he puts down the brush is the moment of realization. The art is complete enough to capture your spirit, but incomplete enough to survive the coming storm. He wraps the large, fragile canvas carefully in heavy sailcloth, the same kind of material used for the Venetian ships, tough and treated against the water. He knows he cannot keep it. Keeping it would expose both of you. He must rely on the loyalty of an old humanist friend in Venice, a quiet scholar who deals in books, not grand paintings, and who understands the value of a forbidden idea. You watch him carry the heavy, wrapped canvas out into the dim Venetian light, a silent, monumental declaration of a love that must now be hidden, perhaps forever. The moment is a devastating precursor to the looming separation that both of you know must follow. The portrait, your truth, is safe, but it is now gone.
The canvas is gone. Wrapped in heavy sailcloth, the portrait of your forbidden love, the masterpiece Sandro refused to finish, is now hidden deep within a Venetian scholar's collection, a forbidden book more precious than gold. This necessary separation marks the final, heartbreaking stage of your journey, the legacy of the silent name. The forced separation is swift and brutal. Sandro, having attracted the dangerous attention of the Doge and facing the increasing risk of Savonarolan-inspired purges, knows he cannot stay in Venice and cannot risk returning to the volatile atmosphere of Florence, especially since the Doge is aware of your identity. You decide on a course of action that safeguards his artistic future above all else.
He must travel north, to the minor, quieter courts of Mantua or Ferrara, where the humanist movement is still robust and the immediate reach of the Venetian and Florentine authorities is less direct. You cannot go with him. Your presence is the ultimate vulnerability. You are the muse, the face of the scandal, the reason for the heresy. You decide to remain in a less conspicuous corner of the Venetian Republic, perhaps working anonymously in a textile business or as a governess, fading back into the functional obscurity from which Sandro's passion initially plucked you. This is a conscious act of love, a choice to endure a forced, heartbreaking separation so that his genius can survive. The art comes first. Your last moment together is not dramatic, but quiet and definitive. He holds your hands, rough from the labor of the bottega and stained with pigments. Remember those hands, modeled for saints and scholars. And he doesn't speak of love, but of art. "The colors will speak for me," he whispers, the low, comforting voice you remember from the dusty Florentine workshop. When you look at the blue of the sky or the shadow on a cloak, you will see the language we created. This is your true legacy of the silent name, not the fame of a patron, but the immortality encoded in the pigment itself. The mainstream historical fact that your separation reflects is the extremely fluid, often dangerous, movement of artists across Italy during the late Renaissance. Political upheavals, wars, and the whims of powerful patrons frequently forced artists to relocate. The great masters, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, were constantly on the move, chasing stability and lucrative commissions. By fleeing Venice, Sandro is simply adhering to the harsh reality of the itinerant artist's life. You survive in the years that follow, defined by the painful awareness of his absence. You never hear from him directly. Contact is too risky, but sometimes second-hand reports, carried by traveling merchants or stray apprentices, bring vague news. The Florentine painter in Ferrara is doing well. He paints angels with unusually intelligent eyes. You realize that he is keeping his promise. He is continuing to paint you, disguising you slightly, giving your intellectual and emotional truth to every figure he creates. You are the internal compass that guides his brush. He has made you immortal by integrating your essence into every figure he creates, transforming your physical form into an enduring memory, preserved through the artwork. You often look at the heavy, polished piece of marble he gave you, the grinding stone. Remember that simple stone he gave you to remind you of the truth of the work? Now smooth and warm from years of being carried in your pocket, and remember the toxic yellows, the expensive blues, and the shared dangerous joke about crocodile dung sunscreen. One day, years later, you receive a package from a trusted, unnamed intermediary. A small, carefully copied drawing. It is a detail from a fresco Sandro completed in the court of a minor duke. The drawing depicts a small, peripheral figure, a woman gathering flowers. Her face is obscured, but her hands, resting lightly on a basket, are rendered with breathtaking fidelity. And in her hand, she is holding a perfect, minute drawing of that small, round grinding stone. The message is clear. I remember. I am safe, and you are my constant truth. This tiny hidden detail leads to the final, beautiful twist of art history. Historians still argue whether some Renaissance artists use tiny, non-traditional objects, like a piece of stone, a specific flower, or an unusual knot, as signature symbols, or as a way to encode a private, deeply personal message into a public work. Sandro has created a private, artistic language, a code that only the two of you share, guaranteeing that your love, though hidden, remains intellectually and spiritually alive within his artistic legacy. Sandro, now established, continues to paint, eventually achieving the status of master. He never returns to Florence. You never leave the Republic of Venice, choosing the anonymity of the lagoons. Your secret love, the one time forgot, did not survive as a conventional romance, but as an enduring intellectual defiance encoded in paint. The legacy is silent because the name of the Muse was never recorded, never celebrated, but the truth of her face, the curve of her neck, and the intelligence of her eyes are preserved in the layers of oil and tempera that now define the greatest movement in Western art. Now, the light in the small, quiet Venetian room is fading. The journey is over, and the long, shimmering path of the Renaissance artist and his muse has dissolved into the silent canals. You can let go of the pressure, the anxiety of the hunt, and the fear of the friar's fire. The secret is safe, hidden within the layers of beautiful, luminous oil, shielded by time and the quiet devotion of an artist who knew that the greatest truth must often be painted in shadow. Let the final image remain, the small, perfect drawing of the grinding stone, the silent testament to a truth only two people ever truly knew. The art survived, the patrons, the piety, and the politics, because it was anchored in a private, beautiful reality. Feel the tension ease from your shoulders and the stillness settle in your mind. The air is soft now, carrying only the gentle whisper of the sea and the distant, rhythmic lap of water against stone. You are safe. The city is sleeping. Rest now, and let the quiet, enduring beauty of a love that defied its time guide you into a deep and peaceful darkness. Your secret is safe.